Welcome. In this episode, we're going to be going over the first 10 games that I think that you should pick up when you start a Sega Master System collection. I'm looking to cover more Sega Master System, and I figured what better way than to start out with the games I think you should get on the system first. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the first 10 games you need for the Sega Master System. Alright, the first game that I think that you should have for the system is pretty much a staple to any Sega system, and that is Shinobi. Now, Shinobi was an arcade port, and they changed a few things. The original arcade version was a one-hit wonder. It was extremely challenging. The Master System version of Shinobi was changed around a little bit to where it's a little more forgiving. You get a life bar now. But this game still plays great, it still looks great, it's got classic tunes, and it has the timeless bonus stages with the ninjas trying to jump at you. It's really good fun, it's very inexpensive, and like I said, it's just a really good solid action game for the Master System. When you go and you pick this up, you're not going to spend a ton of money, and like I said, it's a staple to the Sega brand. Nearly every Sega console out had a really decent Shinobi game with it. The Master System actually has a couple of decent Shinobi branded games, but the original, definitely worth your time, definitely look at picking it up. Alright, next game on the list is a bit of an outlier, but I really enjoyed this game. And this game is not very expensive, it is easy to obtain, and that is Ghostbusters. Now, believe it or not, Ghostbusters is not a straight action game the way that it was on the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive. This game actually has some sort of RPG elements to it. You have to start out, you have to buy equipment, you have to make money, you have to buy more equipment, and the game just doesn't have a normal action game flow to it. It's not beat level 1 and fight a boss, beat level 2, fight a boss. It doesn't flow like that. It has it's a very fast-paced game, but it's also a game that you can really get better and better at in terms of efficiency. How fast do you buy items? How quickly are you, emptying traps? How quickly are you taking care of ghosts? It's one of those games that has a good flow to it, and the final act completely changes the game. The gameplay radically changes in the different stages as you get deeper and deeper into the game. So there's a lot to look forward to in the game. There's some good replay value. The game is challenging as all get out. I mean, trying to beat the last half of this game is really something else. It really challenges the hell out of you. But anyway, Ghostbusters, good cheap game, very, very, out there in terms of flow and game structure. It's just not your normal game. But the Master System version is definitely the best. There was an NES version of this, if I recall correctly, and it's nowhere near as good. This is the one you want, Ghostbusters. Now moving on, I wanted to recommend a really good arcade style, blaster, shooter, something where you're starting out, it's fast paced, you're shooting at things, and that game that you want is Choplifter. Now, Choplifter would not appear on the Master System first, but the Master System is pretty much the only version of the game that I consider a must-own. They really tightened up the gameplay in this one. They put a lot of challenge in it. This game is hard. When you first start out in this game, you're gonna get your butt kicked. But that's cool, man, because it has a certain flow to the gameplay that you get better and better at it. You understand how the enemies attack you. You understand how your helicopter scrolls with and against the screen. And before you know it, you're the one kicking the game's butt. It's got such a good arcade feel to it. This really is one of the top action games on the system in my opinion, and it's really, really easy to play, really easy to get into, and it is a great challenge in terms of long-term gameplay. And it's cheap. It's another great Master System game that's really inexpensive. definitely look at Choplifter if you want a challenging and easy to get into game. Alright, this next one is, I wanted this one because these kinds of games were relatively popular back in the 8-bit era, and I consider this one to be one of the more fun games, especially in 2-player. And that is Rambo, First Blood Part 2. Now, this is a vertically scrolling shooter basically, and you take control of Rambo, and of course you are killing everything in sight. It's got a great flow in gameplay, it's fun, the soundtrack is really good, the game is really inexpensive, and it just has a great 2-player element to it as well. You jump in with 2 players, you can really kick up the replay value with this one. And if you want to compare it directly to something, say, on the NES, I would say it would be close to something like Commando or Akari Warriors. So, Rambo First Blood Part 2, cheap, looks good, sounds good, plays good, very good arcade feel to it. Definitely look at Rambo First Blood Part 2. Now, the next game is a game that I actually would not discover for quite some time. This game would come out a little later in the Master System's life, and I would not play it until actually years after that. But when I did play it, it irritated me to death because it's a difficult game. But it's also a game that you come to appreciate the more you play it. And that game is Batman Returns. Batman Returns is an action platformer very much in the vein of the Genesis games and the original NES game, but it has some really cool mechanics in it. It has a rope and swinging mechanic that you use a lot in the platforming segments. It has a glide and float with the cape out mechanic that can really help you maneuver a level, and the game ends up being really well done. I really liked the game after I started getting better at it, starting understanding the mechanics a little more, and once I started to get better at the game started giving back to me in terms of gameplay. It became really fun. The game, like I said, it's challenging, it's got replay value, and once you learn the fundamentals of those gameplay elements, like swinging and shooting out the rope and grabbing things and gliding down off of buildings, you can really have some fun with this one. A lot of these licensed games were terrible on the Master System. This is actually not one of them. This is a very decent game, and it beats the pants off of the awful Genesis and Mega Drive version of this game. This game is 1,000 times better than that piece of garbage, and it's also not expensive again. Another great game to pick up that plays great, looks great, sounds great, and you can get it for a very good price. Definitely consider Batman Returns. Now, this next game was the ultimate 2-player game on the system. Me and my friends played the absolute hell out of this one. And this was probably the case in a lot of different platforms that this game would ultimately come on, but the Master System version is special to me, and that is Double Dragon. Double Dragon was just one of those games. You can go back and play this anytime with 2 players. It's timeless gameplay. The game doesn't play particularly well, so playing it 1 player is a little rough, you know? I mean, you'll jump into it, you'll play it a little bit, and I mean, it just doesn't play that well. But once you add that 2-player element to it, where you and a buddy are just kicking every thug's butt and you're fighting these tough bosses, all of a sudden replay value through the roof, man, and this game becomes a must-have for the Master System. Now, the Master System version would be superior to the NES version in a number of ways. First, it has simultaneous co-op 2-player. And the Master System was the only 8-bit version at the time that would have that, and meaning against the NES version. But the game is inexpensive. There were a lot of these sold, so it's easy to find complete. I think you can get it now for under $20, which is a steal for this game if you are a Master System collector. And it sounds good, it looks good, it's got a different look to it than the NES game had, so I always appreciated that different presentation that it had. But like I said, in regards to a 2-player game, this is about as good as they come on the Master System. Great game. I highly recommend it. Now this next game is another game that is tied so incredibly hard to the Sega brand. And it's just one of those games that you've got to own it if you have a Master System. And that is Outrun. Outrun is a cheap game. It is a classic game. It is a port of the arcade game, and while it does not replicate the arcade game in terms of visuals, it still has that timeless split route gameplay, that fantastic music, and the game is really inexpensive. It's one of those games that you're going to play infrequently, but when you do play it, you'll have fun for 15 or 20 minutes. And the game, like I said, it's cheap. It's one of those games you can pick up for 10 or 15 bucks in great condition, and you just don't regret it because it is what it is. It's freaking Outrun. And the Master System version, in a lot of ways, is probably the weakest version of this game that ever came out. The Genesis version is better, the PC Engine version is better, but when it comes to an 8-bit racing game, back then those games really weren't that deep, and the split route gameplay of Outrun, you really just can't beat it. It really is that fun for as inexpensive as it is. Definitely pick up Outrun if you own a Master System. Now, my next game is probably going to be a little controversial because I know a lot of Sega Master System guys that hate this game. Hate it. And really, I mean, in some ways I don't blame you if you hate it because I can see why you would want to hate on it. But I would recommend one of your first purchases to be Black Belt. Now, Black Belt was one of those side-scrolling games, sort of like Kung Fu for the NES, where you beat up a bunch of guys that all look the same, and when you get to the end of the level, you have to fight a boss dude. And the game is hard, man. When you first start out, this game is gonna kill you pretty quickly. The boss is tough as heck, man. And you're gonna put some time into this one, but it's got a very good arcade feel to it. It's got a good scrolling graphic to it. The line scrolling in the background gives it some cool depth. And it's one of those games that you get used to and you eventually get better at. And before you know it, you're making some progress in it. And Black Belt, like I said, it's just got that good arcade feel. It's not a bad looking game. It's got two engines to the game too. The side-scrolling engine where you're fighting the minions, and then it's got the actual one-on-one fighting game engine where it changes up how the game actually looks and plays. But Black Belt is a dirt cheap Sega Master System game. It is one of those games that, hell, if you look hard enough for it, I'm pretty sure you can find it for 10 bucks or less. It really is that inexpensive. But Black Belt is definitely one of the Master System games that for me defined the game in its time. It was just so Sega of a game, you know what I mean? It was that arcade, hard as heck game that really, you know, seemed to land on Sega platforms back in those days. And like I said, looks good, sounds good, and it's super cheap. Black Belt. Definitely look at this one too. Alright, my next game is another fantastic two-player game. But this one is also fantastic if you want to play it by yourself, and it's one of those games that was so much better on the Master System it's not even funny. And that is Rampage. Rampage is a fantastic arcade port for an 8-bit system. This game is inexpensive, it looks great, it sounds great, it plays great. Even today, I can throw this game into my Master System and dump 20 minutes into it easily without even batting an eye. The game really is that playable, and like I said, it utterly annihilates the NES version. Number one, this version is 2-player simultaneous co-op. It has all of the characters from the arcade. It is graphically and sound-wise just so superior to the NES version, it's not even close. This is definitely the version of Rampage that you want to own. It is, like I said, inexpensive. You really cannot go wrong with this game at all. Master System version is the way to play it. Rampage, definitely give this one a try. Alright, last game on the list here is a game that made me mad when I went to pull it out, because I knew I wanted to showcase this one. I wanted to talk a little bit about this one, because sports games don't get a lot of love as they age. You know, only special sports games get love, and games like, say, Neo Turf Master for the Neo Geo is one of those sports games that it transcends its age just because it plays so well. And in my opinion, so does this one on the Master System, and that is Reggie Jackson Baseball, which, as you can see, I have it as cart only. And that's why I said that it kind of made me upset, because when I went to pull it out, I was looking for the box and I was like, man, I only have this in cartridge form. And it kind of made me mad because I looked up prices for this game and it is basically given away. I mean, it's so inexpensive and I only have it as a cart. Why the hell do I only have it as a cart? Anyway, Reggie Jackson Baseball, fantastic sports game, so easy to get into. It was one of those early sports games that had a lot of speech in it too. And you remember back in the 8-bit days when you heard a game say anything? It was just so incredibly cool to hear, you know, the game talk, you know, even if it was simple, even if it was strike, you know, or, you know, home run, or whatever the hell the game was saying. It was just so cool to hear it say it. Reggie Jackson Baseball, easy game to get into, man. No, you know, setting things up, nothing that's going to take you an inordinate amount of time to get into a game. You choose your team, you jump into it, there's a few different modes, and swing at the ball. That's all you do. Field the ball. That's all you do. And the game has a very good flow to it, very good feel to it. If you want a good sports game to start out on the Master System that, like I said, transcends its age, where it just retains a certain fun factor, where you're not worried about, are these teams up to date? Are these teams accurate? And you're focusing more on, does the game play well? Reggie Jackson Baseball is definitely that game. Give this one a look. It's pretty doggone good. Alright, that about sums it up for my Master System coverage here for the first 10 games. If you already own a Master System and you don't have some of these games, please consider them. If you are looking at getting a Master System and you're looking at what are the first handful of games that you should get, consider these too. I mean, the Master System was such a great console, but it was a console that was in a very tough marketing situation. Nintendo had an iron grip on the market. They did some unfair business practices there that made it tough for the Master System to compete. Nintendo's iron grip on the Japanese market also meant that they had a certain amount of control over third parties and what games were brought out to other platforms. This did not help the Master System either. So the Master System had to survive on exclusives and that rare platform translation, and luckily enough it got enough of those games to sustain the system in other areas of the world to where it was fairly popular. In Europe and in South America, the Sega Master System had decent markets in these areas, and this meant that the Master System kept getting games well into the 90s, and luckily some of those games were really good. So I'm looking forward to covering those games. I'm looking forward to showing you guys what the Master System has to offer outside of these cheap entry-level games. So look forward to that content soon. I am Sega Lord X. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you next time.